Right.
You were listening.
There's a sound.
Yeah, but I don't.
I don't think I'm so up there.
You sit in the wrong chair. Want to know what day it is?
No, I don't know what it is.
So I've got it recording. It's we're on virtually. I think we can run this for you first
All right.
and then switch you into the
Okay.
into the thing. So that. Read off of it.
I'll let you introduce.
Thank you.
We have in it. Oh, I don't.
That's coming. Okay. And Julie's bringing her extension cord. Okay, because I flouted fire and safety hazard and plugged it in here. Okay. I mean, we're operational, but
I just wanted to let you know when you're sitting in front of us, they see you.
I have to, so I'll try and run the chat from my phone then. That's what I was trying to do, so.
Hey. So.
If you have a microphone, is that what you're bringing today?
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Hello.
Where do we need to?
Let's go unplug. Yeah, this looks like it's all ready to go.
Okay,
There's another outlet right there.
so the top one doesn't work.
Okay, was that one stuck over there? There's one on the other side.
You can plug in a microphone and speaker too,
Okay.
so that's.
Thank you.
After this?
Oh.
Check, 1, 2, 3, 9 or 10. Sounds on. Go to the microphone, you gotta be right up. Kendall. Totally not an insurance liability. They're not liable. Kendall and carry the microphone, you gotta be like right up on it.
Also tell people that if they have coffee mugs here, they can just take them to the kitchen.
Okay.
They don't have to take them back upstairs.
Okay. Good morning. You really do have to have your, can you hear it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. You really have to have your mouth right up next to the microphone for it to work. Welcome to the third Sunday Forum. My name is Carrie Ostby. Before we get started today, a couple announcements. If you have a coffee mug with you today, you don't have to take it upstairs after you're done with it. You can place the coffee mug right in the kitchen as you're leaving. So I was asked to let you know that. Second, today and the next third Sunday Forum on April 16th are kind of two-parters on legislation that's moving through the Minnesota House and Senate this year. Today, our forum is on juvenile restorative justice. And we want to welcome the Reverend Kendall Hughes to speak today from Three Rivers Restorative Justice. Next, in April, our forum will be Isaiah representatives Catherine Lozada and Olivia Bergen to talk about Isaiah's legislative update. And you have handouts on your seats when you sat down today. If we didn't have enough handouts and you want one, please let us know when you leave today. But I'm going to turn the microphone over to Reverend Hughes.
I can do the video.
Okay, we're gonna do a video first.
A victim and an offender come together in space and time. The offender causes harm to the victim, perhaps by physical assault, the victim. The harm can include mental or physical abuse and can occur in the absence of the victim. And other parties could be affected by the harm caused: family, friends, colleagues. As a consequence of the offender's actions, a conflict and harm has occurred between the victim and the offender. If the offender is identified and the police arrest them for the crime, the mechanisms of the criminal justice system comes into play. The purpose of the justice system is to bring about justice. It's not about reconciling the conflict or addressing the harm that exists between the victim and the offender. In fact, if we look at the way the justice system works, it becomes apparent that the parties actually involved in the conflict or harm, the victim and the offender, become increasingly separated. Police investigate the crime and collect the evidence. Police custody officers ensure the safety of the offender whilst in custody. Victim services help the victim with emotional and practical support. The Crown Prosecution Service ensures that there's sufficient evidence to prosecute the offender. The defence solicitor represents the offender and advises whether to plead guilty or not guilty. Witness services look after the needs of the witnesses, including the victim, if they're required in court. If the offender pleads guilty, the victim will not be asked to attend court. Legal clerks ensure the court process works. The jury determines the innocence or guilt of the offender. The judge oversees the trial and decides on the sentence for the offender. Probation services manage the offender during and after they have served their sentence. Prisons incarcerate the offender for the length of any custodial sentence. So, justice is seen to be done, but the original conflict and harm is still there. The only people who can resolve this conflict are the victim and the offender, the person who was harmed and the person who caused the harm. With the restorative justice approach, the focus is on bringing the victim and the offender together. This provides them with the opportunity to communicate with each other directly or indirectly, often for the first time since the original conflict or harm. This might be by an exchange of letters, or it might be in a face-to-face meeting. Of course, both must agree to the meeting, which will only occur following careful preparation and the risk assessments by a trained restorative justice practitioner. The meeting, facilitated by the practitioner, follows a structured approach. It takes place in a neutral and safe environment. Both are given the opportunity to have their say. The victim might ask, "Why did you choose me? Have you been following me? What's happened to my iPad? Do you know how this has affected my children?" And they might say, "I want to see you change. I don't want this to happen to anyone else. I haven't slept properly since. I've had to move house." And the offender has the opportunity to answer the questions being asked of them, and perhaps to explain their behaviour to the victim, and for probably the first time, they see and hear the real impact of their actions on another human being. At the end of a restorative justice meeting, the victim and offender decide together how the offender can repair the harm that they've caused, and perhaps how the offender can take steps to change or stop their offending behaviour in future. This may be by providing answers, an apology, a promise to change their behaviour, or not to approach the victim in future. It can also be a reparative activity. The parties then go their separate ways, but the victim has been given a voice, answers to their questions, and the opportunity to move on, which helps them to cope and recover from the crime. And the offender is presented with an opportunity to take responsibility for the harm that they've caused, display remorse, and be motivated to change their lives.
Thank you all for coming to this forum. The timing of this, Terry, could not be better. There is a bill that is going before the Minnesota House of Representatives on Tuesday morning that would provide for restorative justice in every county in Minnesota. And in order to get movement on that, Senator Champion and others have said we need some support. We need some people to reach out to our representatives so that they will get it out of the Public Safety Committee and move it forward. We all know that there's plenty of funding this year available. This is not actually a terribly expensive bill, but I'm going to present to you a little bit about what this will do and how you can help. So, will you just switch us through on this? Okay. I was supposed to be here with my my colleague Abe Kamara, but in a good way, we are so swamped with cases. We have gotten 10 cases in the last 2 weeks. And Abe has been working overtime. We only have money to pay him for 20 hours a week, which is part of the reason why we need this bill. He's our only staff person, and he's also going to school working on his degree in criminal justice. So I said, Abe, stay home, be with your kids, study today, and I'll do this presentation. But Abe and I work together. I'm a volunteer. I put in about, I think last week I put in 47 hours as a volunteer for this program, and Abe's our one-paid staff person. But the need for restorative justice, yeah, you go ahead and start with that. That view right there.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the next slide.
Okay. All right. Okay, Kirk can help with that. Let me just give you, as you saw in that video, there's really two different ways of approaching when somebody causes harm in the community. There's a way that we traditionally do, and I worked for 20 years in law enforcement and federal law enforcement as a chaplain in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And if you notice in the word law enforcement, the heart of the middle of that phrase is force. It's force. And so the way we traditionally deal with people that have caused harm is we're going to try to use the threat of harm, use force against them to get them not to do that. So basically, we're trying to deter violence by the threat of violence. The criminal justice system, although on the surface, sometimes it looks very like it's done in a very civil way. Once somebody comes into custody, what happens inside the prison, the strip searches and all that, it's a very forceful, harmful thing. But we've tried using facts. You broke the law. Using force, we're going to lock you up. We're going to punish you. We're going to fine you, and fear to get people to change from violent behaviors, from behaviors that harm society. And what we found is that doesn't work. There was just an article in the paper last week about youth in the Rochester Public Schools that went through the traditional punitive system when they had infractions which could have been arrestable or suspending them from school. And they went through the system of being punished. That they repeated their offenses 70% of the time. But then when they went through a restorative process in the schools, they did not return to their offenses, but about 20% of the kids did versus 70%. So the other option, you can go ahead and stay on that first slide. There's not a way to make it full screen. No. Okay, all right, that's fine. All right, there we go. Okay, so you see on the other side, the way that we approach it with restorative justice is, first of all, is reframing the question. Instead of the question being, what rule did you break and what punishment do you get, which is what our judicial system does and what the schools have set up to have, okay, you did this wrong, so you get this punishment. We reframe the question and make the question, who was harmed? Who was the person that was harmed? Whose obligation is it to make that person right again? And how will you do it? And what led you to do this? What led this behavior to happen in the first place? And how do we address that? So we reframe the question. We work on relationships, helping these people to see that this was not just a random act that they did out of being a bad person, but that they had hurt in their lives, and that the person harmed also to help the person who caused harm to relate to them, have empathy for them. I saw this in the prison when people came in the prison. They very rarely really thought about all the family and everyone of the person they had harmed. When they met the grandmother, when they met the sisters, when they met the family of the person they harmed, and that relationship started. They were these guys who had been, some of them walking crime streets that I had worked with. So I never want to hurt people like that again when the relationship came in there. So we build relationships, connect the youth to helpful relationships, and then repetition, that they have to show they're not going to do this over time, and gives it time. So that's what restorative justice brings, as opposed to the criminal justice system. Now, the reason that a lot of prosecutors and a lot of people vote for laws that are hard on crime or tough on crime is because they see, and it does get people to vote in favor of certain politicians who say we're going to be tough on crime, and the pendulum's kind of swinging back that way now. Some progressive prosecutors have not been reelected because people are saying we need to be hard on crime. They've had some statistics about some crimes going up. So there's that mindset of being hard on crime, and the thought that people who are soft on crime, there's hardly an accountability. And by accountability, I mean punishment. And all you want to do is just hug a thug, is the kind of the mentality. But there's not, it doesn't have to be either or. We know that here at this church, that it's not just dualistic either or thinking. There's another way to look at it. And that's both and. We can both have high level of accountability and high support, which is what restorative justice is doing. And I'll explain how in the next slide. So high accountability through restorative justice. And the reason that it'd be great if this bill gets passed, and if we do what we need to do to get it passed, is that the traditional system, we say we want accountability. Almost every time we have a victim of a crime that we talk to, at first they say, I want them held accountable. I don't know about restorative justice. I want to hold them accountable. And what we think here is that means punish them. You know, that they're suspended from school, they get a sentence, they get a criminal record that'll follow them the rest of their life, they get locked up, high accountability. But what does not happen in the traditional system is they're not forced to acknowledge they did wrong. In fact, the traditional system says, don't acknowledge what you did wrong. Their attorneys were saying, don't admit it. We've had a number of clients who said, I wanted to apologize, but the attorney said I couldn't. Because, you know, you act like you did not do it. But in restorative justice, you acknowledge what you did wrong. You acknowledge that you hurt somebody, which is often what the victim needs, and they hardly ever hear that in the traditional system. You express genuine remorse. You are able to make the actions to repair that harm, and the reparations within the traditional system are not very, there's not very good repayment of that. The percentage of people who actually pay the reparations in the traditional system is very low. With restorative justice so far, we've got about close to 85% of our clients have repaired the harm at a higher level than they would in our traditional system, and then no longer committing that harm. To us, that's what accountability is, and that is what we offer, which is often actually more than what would happen in the traditional system. So the benefits, what's the why? Why are we pushing so hard for this bill to get passed? What does it offer to us as a community? Right now, there's a huge backlog still coming out from under COVID, and the police and the county prosecutor are overwhelmed with cases. It's just amazing how many they're starting to send our way, and we can just see that we're just getting just skimming off the top of it. Right now, there's 422 cases backlog. Most cases, it's a year or two before it actually comes to before a judge in the traditional system. With ours, sometimes we have actually had cases that happen 1 week, and by the next week it's resolved. It's not always that fast, but sometimes it's, we have some folks here who are facilitators, Tony and George, and so, you know, sometimes it'll take a month or two for us to resolve it, but the police like giving us a case because they know we'll get to it and have it resolved before the county prosecutor would even be able to decide what they're going to take us into, that we can already have it resolved. And for a youth, something that happened a year ago is ancient history, but if we can get it while it's still fresh, then it has much more impact. So there's higher level of restitution, as we said. So far, all of the victims who've gone through restorative justice, and we've been referred 51 cases so far, all of the victims who've gone through said that they would recommend it to others, and they're glad that they've done it. And so there's lower cost. It costs about 1/8. For us, it's far less because we so far, you know, we have very, very little staff, and we've been able to do most of it with volunteers. But now we're at the level that we can't do it all with volunteers. We need to have to hire some staff, and then a lower level of crime. As I said, the recidivism rate from restorative justice is lower than that from traditional system. So this is what it's offering the community. So some of the successes that we've had here so far, you can see that we started in 2019. We started taking cases in 51 cases so far. We have 24 trained facilitators, some of them from our church here. We've trained 46 police officers, 42 teachers, and out of those 51 cases so far, over 200 people have been involved through Three Rivers Restorative Justice. And of course, the church provides us here offices at a very, very reasonable rate. We meet here and use that. But we have challenges also. That throughout Southeast Minnesota, there are many counties that do not have it. And we're trying to serve all the counties, but we have facilitators driving to Waseca, to Faribault, to other areas to try to do cases. We need it throughout all the counties, and the other counties, they're not as aware of it as we are here. And even here, there's still a lot of people who don't know about restorative justice. And it's not sustainable only with volunteers. I've talked to other restorative justice programs around the country and visited. They said, you know, you've got to get staff. You've got to be able to hire an executive director. You've got to have some professionally trained facilitators. Victim services and the police are asking us to take cases that are more complex in adult cases. But we need more training for that, and people that are trained and can do this full time. The amount of cases one day we got 3 cases in one day, and our volunteers, most of them have jobs. And to try to have them facilitating those cases is not possible just with all volunteers. So we need to be able to hire staff. We'll flip it back one. And also in funding, we've been depending on some grants, but they won't keep giving you those grants. We need some sustainable funding, and this bill provides for that. So let's talk about the bill. And it's right now, there's 2 bills. There's one, well, it's one bill, but it's both in the House and the Senate. It's an identical bill. The one that is coming before the Committee of Public Safety is the House bill. Right now, the Senate bill, I don't know, I don't see it on the agenda yet for their committee. It's called the Committee of the Judiciary in the Senate. But, it will be coming. Can you flip it back? One side, I think it is. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right, you're on the right one. So, yeah, go ahead and move one more forward. All right, so it's gonna go before this, the Public Safety and Finance and Policy Committee. What a great name for a committee. This Tuesday at 10:30. The chair of the committee is Kathy Moore, a representative. And so if we could, and I've got the papers there, and on the papers that you have, it has her name, her phone number, her email address. It also has how to find your representative. And also, if you are willing to do it, so we could contact all the people on that committee to encourage them to pass this. I was just talking to Tony and George, who have a lot of experience in advocating for family medical leave and others. And then they said that I can actually go there and show up and they'll let you speak to the committee. So I'm planning to do that on Tuesday, to go and speak to the committee. But we're going to need to have more than just me. If folks would be willing to reach out to their representative and just send them an email. I've got a text there, and I don't know, is Kirkland still here? No, they get ready to do that in the service. That I could post that text if I'm allowed on the church Facebook page for the email. I'll do that. You might check the Facebook page so you can see the text to post there to send to your representative. If you would be willing to call them, I know they respond well to phone calls. I've also got a page in your handout on notes to talk to your representative to encourage them to help this bill to pass through. So, so you can just look up who represents me in Minnesota Gov if you don't know who your representative is. So that's basically my call to you to be involved to help with that. I don't know if you have any questions. Tony, I know, and George that have seen some of the cases. Want to speak on any of the cases? I could speak to you about some of the cases that we've done. Any questions that I could answer on this?
Question on the bill.
Yes.
How many persons would that involve or would be supportive of?
So what the bill's going to do is it will set up an office in St. Paul, an office of restorative justice with people with extensive experience and people from the community and out of the system for the office. And then every county in Minnesota will have to have also a council for restorative justice that would involve the police, the county prosecutor, and community as well. And this can be run either by the government or by a nonprofit in the community. And it will provide funding to every county for restorative justice. Not full funding, but enough to have at least some part-time staff and other grants that would be available for that. And then so every county, instead of it just being something that might be kind of a distant thought, well, could we go to restorative justice if they even have it available, that it would at least every juvenile case would ask first, well, does this go to restorative justice or does this go to the prosecutor?
So who makes that decision whether it goes to the restorative justice or to the prosecutor?
It can be made at the level of law enforcement, and that's what's happening here in Rochester. Most of our cases come from the police because in that way, they never even start to get a record. There might be a police report that's written, but then it comes to us. And if we handle it, then that report is never filed with the prosecutor. But it can also be the county attorney, and it could be at the level of it's already this far along. It could be a probation. Parole could do it, and a judge could say it as part of the sentence that they would do this as well. Yes.
What kind of dollar amounts attached to the bill?
Not enough, but it's enough for right now they're looking at about $50,000 per county that could be available, and then the funding for several staff in Minneapolis. So it's in the it's less than $10 million that's allocated altogether for right now. So, and that's just a tiny portion of what they have, to work with, but it would make such a difference for you. Yes.
I have one from online. I am an attorney for an accused. At what point do I discuss your process with the client?
If they are in this area, they could do it early on as a possibility. They would have to, of course, talk to the prosecution and make sure that prosecution is willing to do it as well. Because really, it can't be just the defense attorney that wants it, it needs to be the prosecutor. Because I know everybody realizes that the most powerful person in the courtroom, not the judge, is the prosecuting attorney. They make the decision on how things go.
That prosecuting attorney is a Rotarian.
Is what?
Is a Rotarian. He
Okay.
comes with a sweater on to have pizza with kids.
Yeah.
They don't realize if they have a problem, he's the prosecutor.
Yeah. And the surrounding counties, their prosecuting attorneys have been very supportive of this. He has some, this would be helpful. If this bill passed, it might give him a little more confidence that he could be more supportive than he has. He's a good man, but in carrying out restorative justice, he still has some reserve because I think who votes for him.
The question is, so what are the main barriers? Is it because of the idea that punishment is the proper way, that is physical punishment or restriction for solving problems? Is that the biggest problem?
Yeah, I think so. The question is that the idea of punishment? I think it is. It's just in our mindset that there's only one thing you can do when someone has done harm, and that is to enforce the laws and punish them according to the law. And people don't even realize there is another alternative out there. And people think that they're angry. The people who have been harmed think, I've been hurt, I want to hurt them back. It's just that level of a reaction, not realizing that that's just perpetuated. Because when you respond with life, basically we're saying, we'll hurt you worse than you hurt us. But we know that just escalates instead of a higher way of doing it. But yeah, it's that desire for punishment.
If the infraction is in the schools, does it have to go to the police and then to you, or could the school connect?
Yes, it can. And the interesting thing is that right now our police are so aware of this that they tend to be sometimes more willing to work with the restorative process for some of these kids in the schools at times in certain levels. But then some of the principals are. And yes, we've been training teachers, and that's great if the teachers and the staff can do it, and so it never has to go to the school resource officer. You know that every school, even the elementary schools, have school resource officers assigned to them, so it can easily go that way. But the schools that are using it and they're training their teachers, and the Minnesota Department of Education actually has a restorative justice branch. They're one of the best in the country on teaching restorative justice in the schools. And our schools we've been doing some training in them as well, as our schools are moving that direction. And that was, I don't know if you saw the article I mentioned in the Post Bulletin was Rochester schools that did that study. The kids that repeated infractions, 70% in the traditional way, and only 20% repeated them in restorative way. So we're getting calls almost every week to go and do presentations to teachers.
Would you share a case study?
Well, I share one. Yes, I thank you for that. So a couple of them. One, a young man at one of our schools who, in his life, he was couch surfing. His mother had addiction issues, and so he just would stay in with friends and up most of the night. And so he was in one of our alternative schools, and got into a fight with some kids in the school and ran out into the parking lot of the school. And in the parking lot, realized, what am I going to do now? I don't have anywhere to go. Actually, the school's my best place to be because home was not a welcoming place. And he was on the far side of the parking lot, and the principal, who he actually had a good relationship with, was out looking for him, was calling his name. And the principal couldn't see him because he was on the far side of the parking lot. So he jumped up, not thinking, stepped on a car, jumped up on a car, stood on the roof of the car and said, "Here I am." We did over $1,000 worth of damage to the car. I crunched in the roof. It was a teacher, a substitute teacher. His car he had damaged. So that could have risen to the level of a felony, actually, because of the amount of damage. It was over $1,000 worth of damage. So it was referred to the police. The teacher was understandably upset. And she kind of wanted, he needs to be punished. He needs to learn his lesson at first. But we said, would you like to have more of a say in it? Probably we're not going to get any payment back out of them. Probably not going to get anything back. If they punish them, it's going to probably be a suspended sentence. But he'll have a criminal record and it'll follow him the rest of his life, and he's 13 years old. She's like, "No, I want to do restorative justice." And so, she sat down with him and talked about the damage and all that she had to do to get her car fixed. And she said, here's what I want you to do. She says, I'm a widow. I've got a lot of property and I've got a lot of brush on my property and I need it moved because I want to put in a fence. I need the brush moved. So I need you to come to my house and move this brush. And he actually began to enjoy doing that. He learned to use a little bit of her equipment, a little ATV thing that she had there with him, her helping him, and moved all the brush. They developed a relationship. And then the last day he was supposed to come, she said, you know, you've done all the brush, you've done all your hours, you've got 1 hour left to do. She said, my German Shepherd just had puppies and I need somebody to socialize it. Will you socialize the puppies? And so he came and he played with puppies for an hour and he was thrilled. He actually brought 2 of his younger siblings with him and they all played with puppies, had a great time together. And she still reports that she has a good relationship with his student instead of, you know, them having this hostility. So that's one we see a lot like that.
Sorry, I have another online. So as a follow-up, as a defense attorney, is this part of a plea bargain?
It can be. We have had it go that way where the judge would take that into consideration. And then, and sometimes they'll wait then to see if they complete the restorative process. And if they do, then the judge will dismiss charges or suspend the charges. So it can be part of this. Yes.
How many programs are there in Minnesota at this time?
I know of 17 counties that have programs in them. The cities have like 4 programs, and some of them are doing far more than we are here. Some of them are doing 4 or 5 cases a week or more. I estimated the numbers based on all those programs. I would estimate about 15,000 people, either victims or people who cause harm, are served by restorative justice last year in Minnesota. So in our Department of Corrections was actually the first DOC in the whole country to have a restorative justice program. It is big in the prison, where they bring in surrogate victims to the men in prison, and they have restorative justice panels inside the prison to handle infractions. It's lowered violence inside the prison, and it has also lowered recidivism. The men who go through that program are much less likely to recidivate than those who just sit in the cell and are punished for doing this.
So are they keeping statistics about this to show how it's helpful?
Say the first part of that question again?
Are they keeping statistics?
Yes.
about-
Yes, they are. Yeah.
So-
Yeah. And there's on that paper there, the commissioner of the Department of Corrections, Paul Schnell, is very in favor of this. He says, we need this bill. He says it's helping our people who are incarcerated here, and it's helping the victims also. So if you get a chance to speak to anybody on the phone about it, you can bring that up, that the head of the prison system says, we need this for our victims and for lower recidivism. Do you have another question? Kathy, did you have another? Yes.
I just want to make a comment. So the United Methodist Women, for years, we have been working on this. And I remember one distinct case where there was vandalism in a church. And then they moved to restorative justice, and the young man had to paint and repair the stuff that was damaged. And it was very well received that it was through restorative justice. And so I think we just really have to continue to work on it, and which would be now the United Women in Faith.
That's good. I want to recognize somebody else who's here. Connie, Sheila is here. Connie has helped me with restorative justice. She's a part of our church and helped me with restorative justice when I was still working in the prison. And she is head of a group that is sad there has to be a group by this name, but she's head of a group called Parents of Murdered Children. And she has come into the prison and brought in victims of crime. And now there's guys who still talk about that, Connie. That was probably 6, 7 years ago that you came into the prison, and guys that still talk about. And I will never forget. It changed me to hear some of these crime victims come in and share their stories and the impact. And when they could put a face on, oh, that's the mother, that's the grandmother of those guys that we, were mad at. The representative of those guys that we were mad at, and the harm that's caused. Sometimes it goes on for decades and decades. It never stops, that kind of harm. I don't know if you want to say anything, Connie, about your experience with representing victims, because remember, this we're thinking some of the people who caused harm, like when the defense attorney speaks, but this is really about the victims too.
I'll say a little bit, but I.
Do you feel comfortable coming up and using, sorry, people at home can hear
Yes.
you? Thanks.
Thank you. I don't want to say a whole lot, just because there's a plan that I'm going to be doing one of these in the next upcoming months sometime. So come back for that one, so I'll tell more there. But yes, as Kendall said, I'm a survivor of a homicide victim. My brother Joel was murdered 23 years ago. His case does remain unsolved, and because of that, I got involved with Parents and Murdered Children, which is a national nonprofit organization that basically, the primary purpose is to provide support for survivors and homicide victims. And so we have some monthly support group meetings. We do have a chapter. I'm the leader of the chapter here in Southeast Minnesota. We also serve on the National Board of Trustees for the national organization. But and I will share a lot more about that when I speak. But we are here to help survivors, and we have. That's how I first met Kendall. A couple times we came out and shared our stories. So yeah, thank you.
So just keep that in mind, that really the benefit of this is huge for people who had harm. Every time I've had parents of murdered children or people who have had great harm in their lives come in and speak to prisoners or speak to people who caused harm, the people who shared their stories said that's the first good thing that came out of this horrible thing in my life. Because by sharing this story and them having empathy and realizing these men are not monsters, they're people who are making decisions on what they think is right in the moment, but helping them to change their minds and think differently. Now, I feel like my loved one's death is not totally in vain. Sometimes it can be helpful. It doesn't solve everything. It doesn't heal everything because the pain never stops. But I have yet to see a victim who came and shared their story who did not say, I'm glad I did it. And we do a survey of everybody. And so far, all of our victims have said, I wish all victims of crime could have the opportunity to do this.
The question is, what groups or organizations are against this particular program because they have a monetary investment or reward that comes from that?
Some branches of law enforcement that we've found in this area are not. I will say Rochester Police is supportive of it. And I would like to say it's all because they're noble, they think at a higher level. It's been interesting for me to see, and they have been very supportive. Chief Franklin was very quick to sign an agreement with us. Dodge County, Fillmore County have signed agreements with Government Community Custody has signed an agreement. But there's some prosecutors who haven't, some law enforcement that hasn't. And you could see it as a threat in some ways. So I think that's kind of what we're up against.
What about prison systems and, those who control not only, but earn money off the prison system?
Yeah, obviously the private prisons, they benefit. We have a system that does actually have people who are benefiting financially. The more people are locked up and the longer they're locked up and the more they come back. I've heard it in working in corrections. I heard it more than once, and it was said in the presence of the guys. Our job security is you coming back to prison and your kids coming to prison. I've heard it said, that when the children would come to visit their fathers or mothers in prison, and the guard would say, "There's our job security," because they knew that those kids were likely to be coming too. So is that there is in the union, the correctional workers union in that way. But I would say that with this governor and the current commissioner of prison, Paul Snell, he is very in favor of it. The Minnesota Department of Corrections does have a strong restorative justice program. And so they're moving that way. And it is far less expensive. It's far less expensive. Yes.
One more online. Have defense attorneys been supportive of your program?
Yes, we have a defense attorney on our board. And the chief of the defense attorneys in Southeast Minnesota, Meg Mitchell, she helped us get started. She's done presentations and training for our staff. So yeah, defense attorneys are way on board. And at the same time, we have to keep in mind that we are also here serving and mainly, I think, to help the victims too. And so sometimes people think, well, you're just here to help the person who caused harm. They do get help from it, but it's also to give victims a voice. The system, and Connie will probably, I can tell you this, the system is not friendly towards victims either. There's a lot of pain that they go through, and they don't really have a voice like you would in restorative justice. Yeah. Yes.
Are you optimistic about the bill passing?
I'd say it has a less than 50% chance right now, unless we get more support for it. We do need support. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of bills that are being floated right now. I wish I had seen more. I know I talked to in the Senate. So this is the House. The House version has 7 co-authors, and everybody that we've talked to so far say, yeah, I'll co-author that. So we're getting some support there. So we can get the House one going. I have more confidence for that. The Senate, it's Senator Champion, Bobby Champion, who's the president of the Senate, who actually authored the bill. And the co-author is also a senator out of the cities. But I asked them, I said, can we testify? And they said, let's wait till we get some movement. So far, I haven't heard any movement in the Senate. So, but if we can start with the House and get that going, then maybe it'll motivate the Senate. So there's still plenty of time. And I believe that the way that the makeup right now of the Senate and the House is that it could be passed. If it's ever going to be passed, this could be the year that could happen. So, but we need some more voices. Yeah.
I'm going to give a legislation 101.
Okay. Yes. This lady knows all about it.
Yeah.
Come on in.
Thank you. So you can see, I thought we had the chair of the House Committee.
Yeah, we can back it up.
Okay, I think she's from Shoreview, which would be up in the Twin Cities area. So what you can do, if you have any interest in supporting this bill and you want to testify, which is very easy to do, Typically, they limit you to maybe 2 to 3 minutes, okay? But if you know anybody in the state that lives in that person's area, it'd be really helpful for you to just kind of do that nudge to that resident that lives in her district to say, hey, let's get a little bit more support behind this bill. So that's really what it's going to take, is that if you want to testify, typically you have to notify the administrator of the committee by 5 p.m. the day before. You can submit written testimony. Sometimes they need that by 5 p.m. the day before the committee hearing. And it is a way to be involved. I submitted written testimony when I couldn't be there in person. So what happens with this bill, because it involves money, is it may be heard in a committee, it has to be heard in the Senate, and it has to be heard in the House in order for it to have any chance of moving forward. If it is passing through these committees, they may vote to say, we vote to lay this bill aside. And that means that it may be rolled into what's known as the omnibus bill, okay? And then what happens towards the end of session is if the House version and the Senate version of that bill do not match, the language doesn't match, they would have that bill heard in a conference committee, which is where changes could be made. But also the risk of having that bill rolled into the omnibus bill is that you've got representatives from the House, representatives from the Senate, which it could be, I think, 3 members of each body. If they're hearing that and they are asking for anyone in the audience here to speak in support of this issue, if you're not there, they could just put a line right through it and there it goes. And that's something that is the danger of having something rolled into the omnibus bill. You want to make sure that you have a chief author that is really going to be shepherding this bill through the process. So there's a lot of ins and outs. I will tell you, when I was helping with some corrections legislation years back, conference committee, the chairs, they adjourned They said, let's take a lunch break and last day's session, and had to happen that day. They said, let's take a break, everybody go get something to eat, come on back. I ran to McDonald's. And that's where the chair that was representing the House, the chair of the Senate, they had all the papers laid out and they said, I'll give you this if you give me this. I'll give you this if you do this. So really the way that political things work are not what you see in that Schoolhouse Rock, how a building comes along. I just want to say that, and I'm sorry.
No, thank you. It's great to have you here, Tony. And Tony is a volunteer for us. All the things she does, she also volunteers and helps with cases. Yeah, very good.
You know, a couple
Yes,
of
sure.
when we at Annie Smith on the phone, we brought HF 46's attention. Before you hung up, you slide on.
Good, that's true.
He's very supportive.
That's right.
We know where he's gonna be at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
I know we're all, he's very supportive. So is Kendall. Liz Bolton, they're all, I mean, for 20 districts.
Yeah, that's right.
And Wayne Long, we could work on him a little.
Right.
And we should. We heard him say in the committee that he didn't believe the justice system was fair. It's going on. He said the justice system was not fair because it favored people with more money. He said that in a committee, and it's on record. He said it. So he doesn't support this bill, but you know, he should support it.
Yeah, and this does have more hope, I think, of bipartisan support because, because it's for juveniles, and most people are in favor of giving juveniles a second choice, a second chance, and not giving them a record that will follow them the rest of their life. A lot of people think, and the defense attorneys help me understand this, that just people think, well, if it's a juvenile record, it doesn't follow them, but it does. It can be pulled up on records, and there are youth that are not able to get jobs years down the road because of something they did in a foolish choice. Yeah.
I just wanted to add something, a law, I think this program is really great, especially when you're technically when you're doing one. Because it keeps the recidivist right down.
Yeah.
And hopefully, kind of helps them through their life and not get to the point where they affect them.
Right.
You know, so I think it helps in prevention of higher.
It's a lot better to correct a child than it is to try to fix an adult, and all the harm and all the victims along the way, the whole ripple effect of that and the lives that were destroyed by that. And that was the interesting thing in the prison as we taught restorative justice. The guys were like, why didn't somebody teach me this when I was in junior high school? And they would take all of our curriculum and mail it home to their kids and say, you need to learn this now, not when you get to where I am and after you've heard all the people like I did. You know, so this is very important that it goes for juveniles. Yeah.
And I'm just gonna say an examples actually of what I've seen when the youngest person I think that I was 19. So there's a lot of shame that some of these kids carry, but when they're meeting with someone that is representing the victim or is the victim, you see that healing taking place, you know, that understanding. And one of the individuals that was the victim, he said to these 3 young kids, including that 9-year-old, he said, if you see me walking down the street, say hi. If you went through the typical system, it'd be the offender completely avoiding the victim, they would not make eye contact, they would feeling, but there's healing that takes place.
Right. Yeah, there was a case that happened yesterday here at the church, and I just saw the reparation agreement. And the school had put these 2 students to where they were a no contact order, that they couldn't talk or anything. But part of the reparation agreement was to go back to the school and say, we would like to have contact in a civil way. We want to be able to see each other and say hi. Do we have that? Because they had repaired that harm, and they now are able to be civil instead of, well, we got to just not talk to each other. Repair the relationship. I know Tony also helped out with the case where there was two young girls that had robbed a store, and it turned out the owner of the store was wasn't he a retired minister, and his wife was a social worker. And they're like, we want to help these girls. So the girls ended up coming in and dusting and cleaning in the store and paying back what they had stolen too. But it was, they actually saw the needs of these kids, one whose father was in prison and the other one was in a foster care setting. And they said, we want to help these kids. So it built that connection between the people they had robbed and them. Yes.
So how many counties do you and your organization here serve at this time?
We have had requests from 6 counties. And so we have agreements signed with Dodge, and Fillmore and here in Olmsted County. And yeah.
So how would it benefit you if this bill passed?
Well, those outlying counties, they don't have much knowledge of it, and we're having to travel over there. It would help get things going in those counties, make it easier for us to empower the people in those counties to do it as well. And it could help us with some funding so that we could hire maybe an executive director that could be working with the Tony. You got to have that, and get Abe, our program manager, a little more time that he could be working as well. So. That could be helpful, and it would give it more legitimacy, I think, with the public too, to know that it's supported on the state level. Yes.
Seem to be talking about the cost of potential bidding, so, but I don't hear anything about dollar-wise savings.
Well, the savings is that the national studies of this as that restorative justice cost 1/8. And you kind of, I don't know if you saw the opening video, it shows, all the people that get involved in a case. And all those are professional people that are being paid. This eliminates all of that cost. And so it really reduces the cost. And so every case that comes our way, it's one that doesn't have to go through the court system, to the prosecutors and probation officers and all of that. And then the lower reoffense rate also has a positive effect in that regard.
Then I don't know why any legislator would oppose it.
Right, yeah, and it does,
That's why I say bipartisan.
yeah. Well, it's interesting, even back in the previous administration, the one bipartisan thing that got passed was it was called the First Step Act. And it was on the for federal inmates and federal system, but it had restorative justice as a part of it. And for the first time now, the Federal Bureau of Prisons is talking about restorative justice. But that was the one thing that the Trump administration got passed on a bipartisan level was reform, because even Republicans and Democrats see that this makes sense. Everybody knows our system is not turning out good results. Everybody knows that. And so they're looking for alternatives. So there should be hope that the Republicans will support it.
None of our representatives are on the committee. How do we?
That's true.
I'll
Yeah.
talk to them this afternoon.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean, that means you gotta get to the committee.
Right.
So the chairperson is the one that.
Yeah, I
seems
think
to be,
so.
I need to contact.
I would guess. Would you agree, Tony? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we want to get testimony, yes.
Right. Yeah.
Get a lot of that.
Right.
And letters to the editor. That's the other thing that is very powerful.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the editorial board of Fulton,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
those some editorial.
Yes.
How did it get started?
How did this get started?
And where did?
Where did it
start?
Where did restorative justice get started? Well, it's interesting. My colleague, Kamara, is from Africa. And over there, that is a very common way, and they call it under the tree talks, so that, they don't have prison systems in the bush and all that. But if someone within a tribe or someone else within that tribe, they bring the elders and they sit under the big tree in the community and they talk it out. And so it's an indigenous kind of way of doing it. I first learned about restorative justice from a guy by the name of Robert Yazzie, who was a Navajo. He's actually one of the chief justices of the Navajo Nation, and this was back 25 years ago. He came and spoke at where I was working in a federal prison in Leavenworth, Kansas, and he said, this is a tribal way. Within our tribe, when there's issues, we can't afford to send our young people off to prison. We do it this way. So it's it's older than the Western way of doing justice. People coming together and talking about. You think about your parents. Sometimes when you were young, you did something stupid, and the neighbor, you broke their window or something like that. They made you go and apologize and make it right. It's just the natural way of doing things. In fact, there was a sociologist who said the government has stolen our conflicts from us. They said, well, you can't solve your problems. We've got to solve them for you. And this is giving it back to the community to say you can solve it. Now, it got started in North America in a formal way and by the term of restorative justice in the 1970s, when there were some young men in one of the northeastern states, I forget which one it was, I think it might have been Maine or upstate New York, that did vandalism throughout the community. And some forward-thinking probation officers and others said, let's see if we can do this a different way. And they had them go and apologize to the people and do repair the damage to all the people whose property they had harmed. And that's kind of where that started. The Mennonites picked it up, and Eastern Mennonite University actually offers a master's degree in restorative justice now, and several others. And they really began to study the indigenous ways of doing this, along with bringing in some other, more evidence-based ways of doing it. So that's how it has grown. And now it's everywhere in the US. And there are countries that this is their primary way of doing restorative justice. Australia is doing a lot of it. New Zealand is doing a lot of it. In New Zealand, all juvenile cases go through restorative justice. And Iceland, yeah. And I had a defense attorney tell me he believes, in talking to the people coming out of law school, that in 10 years it'll be that way in the US. That, or at least in Minnesota, that all juvenile cases will go through restorative justice. And so, but this is a good step in that direction. Yes.
Has anybody gotten in touch with our United Methodist pastor at the Shoreview Church?
At which church?
At Shoreview United Methodist.
Starview?
Shoreview.
Shoreview. Shoreview. No, I don't know that.
Because that's one of, I mean, that to me is a natural thing is, I mean, being that she's from Shoreview, is to contact our church in Shoreview.
Okay.
And see if they would be also willing
To
to
reach out. Okay, so she's in their jurisdiction. I understand what you're saying.
That's-
I understand.
Minnesota Annual Conference, we're all
Sure.
connected. We all know how to get in touch with each other. So
Okay.
that's something
Okay, thank you. Yeah, if you would do that, just ask her to ask them to pass it, because I know where Pastor Elizabeth's going to Hennepin Avenue, they have a huge restorative justice program there that I've been over there. That's one that does over 300 cases a year at Hennepin Avenue. All the counties where we're doing cases, we meet in the Methodist churches. They're supported. Deb Collin, the pastor of Chapel, she does a lot of cases for us. So it was the United Methodist Women had restorative justice as one of their tenets, I think, a couple of years ago. All right, we've gone way over time.
No, that's okay. Thank you very much today. Thank you, everybody, for coming.